Hello and welcome to an episode of The Nutella Experience with featured guest and friend Sophie Kim. What did you get from it?
I think
Like the
what
13th loophole
itself. I think what struck me the most was how
How broad the loophole was, or
like how I mean, honestly, like, if I'm being honest, I think my immediate reaction was just feeling like sick and like, how insane is this that like it seems like it's so under the rug. Like, once someone's in jail, it's like they just kind of disappear.
Oh yeah. No, of course.
And what struck me is people kept talking about how systems of oppression are constantly being redesigned and reborn in different forms, and how, like, maybe in the times of slavery or Jim Crow or other forms of oppression, systematic oppression, it was clear in one way or another what was happening.
Right.
And it is 100% clear, if you even look into it for a second, that mass incarceration is a huge problem, especially for communities of color.
Right.
But the way that, like, I've been brought up, it's almost like it doesn't exist.
It's very hush-hush.
Like,
no, it's...
yeah.
No, but also, I was reading James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, and he brought up this one point, and I could not get it out of my head. He had this one cycle that really caught my attention. It was based along the lines of Christianity and how, because he's a Muslim himself, and it caught my eye that he was talking about how Christians have this whole value of, like, charity, forgiveness, and like love or something like that. But in modern white America, it's always blindness, terror, and loneliness as the three traits instead. And it was entertaining how he said that, and I was wondering what you thought of those traits themselves, like the blindness in itself, the blindness of the system, like police brutality, mass incarceration, blindness towards the fact that the communities of color are designed, not necessarily designed, but they're put in a situation where it's almost that it's hard for them to get out because of the situation that they were born in. They're always Section 8 households, barely scraping to survive, relying on Social Security checks, that one member of the household that's bringing in the check to make ends meet somehow, whether that be the mom on crack or the dad that's bordering on never there because he's working so much, or whether it's just a kid that's on the street trying to hustle a little bit of dollars just because, he doesn't want to live like that anymore. I was wondering specifically, maybe not specifically, but just what you thought on that in itself.
Yeah.
What's up?
I mean, I think what really struck me was the last line of the movie, or the documentary, is this man saying, people always say, like, wow, I wonder how people just stood by in slavery. I wonder how people just stood by in Jim Crow. I never could do that. And then he says, but it is happening, and you are. I think this whole, like, I'm blind to it, I don't see it happening.
It's definitely a thing.
It's 100% a thing, and it is happening, and it's not that hard to.
It's not that hard to keep it quiet.
To see how dehumanized, specifically males of color, are just completely dehumanized and criminalized in the media we watch, in the music we listen to, and yeah, I think it's really interesting that you said like one of the other words is terror.
Yeah.
I think terror is kind of like a way out of seeing people complexly, and like letting difference and acceptance into your life is just being like scared of it,
right,
and refusing to deal with the fact that we have a horrible system of centuries, decades and decades of systems of oppression, and to just be scared of people, and to pretend you don't know why you're scared, or to just be ignorant to that all, is just like kind of a way out.
No, of course. No, I was also along those lines is he also, well, kind of going along what James Baldwin was saying, but he also said that blindness comes before terror and loneliness. And what entertained me was that there's blindness in the system and on the part of the black person itself. And this is coming out of my head. I'm not sure if he said this precisely himself,
Mm-hmm.
but he said that there's blindness along the lines of the black person, because he's saying that, and this is because blacks are generally more Christian, not necessarily Muslim, but along the lines of the blindness is that they're too forgiving in their Christianity, in their mindset, because how I think that they see it is that when they're Christian, they're blind because they forgive too much. They don't say, okay, I forgive you this time, but the next time I'm going to prepare myself for what's about to happen,
Mm-hmm.
because like the movie said, the systems are always redesigned, always rethought through, and all of that stuff, but it's not, they always come in new forms, and they don't exactly prepare themselves in a way that is adequate to get them out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like right now, currently it's mass incarceration. It was Jim Crow earlier in like
Mm-hmm.
the 60s, 70s. And then before that, it was like lynchings, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
public lynchings. And then before that was slavery.
Yeah.
And so they're not quite preparing themselves in order to be able to combat what's happening. And so as a result of that, they just end up being just there.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up being terrorized as a result, because they forgive too much, and then they don't see it coming that it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
You feel?
That's really interesting. That's interesting. I was just speaking like of terror and blindness on the side of white people, but that's really interesting that that Baldwin was talking about it from the side of the black man.
Right.
And that, I think...
Now what say you on this topic? Like, entertain me what you think about, like, this whole black, for the moment, let's say ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think on that in regards to the modern society? What do you think? How do you think that plays? How do you think that plays out?
Sorry, did you say what kind of ignorance?
Like ignorance of the system, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Ignorance on the part of the black, that they're not preparing themselves to see, okay, this is going to happen again in a different way, but we have to prepare ourselves in order to not be so easily
I see what you're saying.
terrorized.
Yeah, and also what I think was really interesting in the movie was, I remember someone saying, these systems will continue to be, they will continue to redesign themselves, and we have to be vigilant.
Right.
And careful, and loud, basically, because it's not gonna stop.
Right.
It's gonna be hush hush in this way, or covered up in the way it's being said, but it will always be. And I think what's so unfair, what's so unfortunate, is that a lot of the communities that are being oppressed and terrorized don't have the information that they need, or that they should have.
Right.
They don't have hands on the mechanisms of power, on education, on wealth, and so there's so much more burden on those communities to be vigilant about exactly what's going on, and how, so I wouldn't call it ignorance. I guess maybe, but I think it's just so unfair of this world that
Disadvantage.
Right.
Would it be easier for you to call it a disadvantage instead of ignorance?
Yeah, that it.
Because I feel like at this point you might as well call it ignorance, because it's been happening for 200 years, right?
Right.
And they've had it coming for 200 years. They've seen it happen for 200 years, since slavery ended, or 150, however long it was. But since slavery ended, right? They have the first wave, right? They have the public lynchings in, I suppose primarily the South, but it's all over the place, really. And then they see that happening. That's the first wave, right? And then the second wave is Jim Crow, right?
Mm-hmm.
Still bad, still not good.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you have mass incarceration. That's stage 3. That's
Right.
150 years of.
Right.
That's 3 generations worth of people being imprisoned, killed,
Right.
and you have, and then that's 3 generations worth. At this point, that's 3 generations of fatherless kids, of moms who have to take on the role of raising their and children. Jesus, English. But that's, at this point, I feel like you could almost call it ignorance, because that's not.
Yeah.
To call it a disadvantage after that much time of seeing it happen is an insult to a human, because that's a lot of time.
Yeah.
To learn, to see what's happening. And granted, they don't exactly do well in school, but that's regardless of that, you hear, hey, my dad's in prison. Yeah, mine too. What years go get time for? Oh, double homicide. You? Oh, drugs. That's a whole community right there whose dads are in prison, and you see that happen, but they still don't. It may also be that they don't have the information, but as well, that's 150 years right there. That's 3 generations. That's plenty of time to learn, don't you think?
I guess I see what you're saying about ignorance, and I think because maybe the word ignorance has a negative connotation was why I said that, but I think it would be completely unfair to say that it is even close to the Black community's fault that 1 in 3 Black men end up incarcerated in their lifetimes.
Right.
Because I think I mean, it's not only slavery and Jim Crow, but we can look at, have you ever read The Case for Reparations? When Coates talks about, like, the housing, the way...
Remind me which book this is?
I read that so long ago. But it's an article he wrote in The Atlantic. And
I might have read this a while ago.
Right.
Refresh my memory. Keep going.
But he talks about how after Jim Crow, private, like, wow, I read this a while ago too, but people who own or who sell leases for private property,
right,
were specifically selling certain houses to people of color and others to white people.
Yeah.
And I think the term is redlining, and making certain communities only communities of color.
Right.
And that's just another example of the way that people of color, Black people, have been economically disadvantaged and taken advantage of. And it's no surprise that there is such a striking wealth gap by race.
Right. No, it's
yeah.
No, I see where you're going, and it's but also you look at the neighborhoods, and it's not exact. I mean, the wealth and poverty levels, those also correlate with crime as well, and those neighborhoods
Right.
aren't exactly spectacular either on those accounts. It's a system, but also it's a system that needs to be whacked. But anyway,
Right.
but also I want to talk to you about this one bit, the third cycle, or the third stage of the cycle, the oppression, or no, the loneliness, sorry. What say you on that? Just what do you think how do you think that's involved in the prison system and the stages of blindness and terror? What do you think?
I think, again, I'm not the most qualified person.
Sure.
But I think that the result of being someone who is constantly dehumanized by the world around them and told that they are violent criminals is extremely damaging. And even in the documentary, they said it's not just that white people believe that, Black people start to believe that too.
Right.
And that the result of that message that you are not human, that you are a caricature, is so damaging, and it creates terror, it creates loneliness.
Because you feel like you are alone in a situation where you have no way out, where you're always going to find yourself in a situation where you have almost no options, good options that is, to get yourself out of this system of terror. Sorry, that was me interjecting. Keep going.
No, yeah. And I think if anything can make that feeling of loneliness stronger and worse, it's being in a literal cell without access to outside or other humans who care about you. Of course that would make anyone feel lonely and unhuman, and it's just awful. Like the statistics that, did they say 6.5% of the US population are black men, and 40% of the prison population is black men. Like that's not some kind of like, it's not that 40% of the world of America's population, or how should I say this? It's not that that 40% of America's population naturally is a black man that naturally does more crime. It's that they have been put into a system that is completely against them, in economically, socially, like in literally every way.
Right.
It's not some coincidence, or like I hate it makes me so mad when people assert that immigrants are naturally criminals, or that Mexicans coming across the border are naturally have drugs and rape and all of these awful things.
Right.
Because most of them are, well, not most of them, but a lot of them are women and children, or men who are fleeing violence, or, like...
They're trying to get away from bad circumstances
Right.
themselves.
Right.
And no, it's true. It's not a good set of circumstances any way you cut the cake. It's not good at all. It's but I also think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong here, but the loneliness also could possibly be because of the lack of information, I suppose, or like how people in inner city schools, black people in inner city schools don't exactly do well in school, and this could potentially, and because they don't have that information of previous generations having to suffer through this set of circumstances, they don't quite see that they're not exactly alone in the situation themselves. And I actually just thought about this too. I was like, whoa, huge breakthrough. But that could potentially be a reason as to why they keep making, not keep, but make pretty much the same mistakes over and over again across 3 generations of time. But it's not a good set of circumstances. It really isn't.
No.
But now let me ask you this: according to on Baldwin's method, blindness always goes first, right? Do you think, and by blindness I'm just talking about in general, not necessarily from one specific point of view or not, but do you think that the blindness is eroding to a certain extent? And I leave this open-ended just to see your answer. I'm curious. Do you think it has eroded to a certain extent?
Like
blindness to the situation of how blacks find themselves in, like blindness to possibly their loneliness, or to the fact that their terror is widespread, or do you think that has eroded to a certain extent?
Like gone away, or what do you mean by eroded?
Sure.
Sorry,
No,
or changed
gone
form.
away a little bit. Like perhaps they think they're not as alone as they possibly think. Like, do you think that, like, the blindness to the situation of mass incarceration, that they possibly could get they could be put into the system of mass incarceration, or do you think that they could be they could be seeing that they're not exactly as alone, that this is as more widespread than they think. Do you think that it's gone away a little bit, or do you think it's pretty much still there in its entirety? What do you think?
Something that was also interesting from the movie was them saying that basically like speaking on criminal justice and how there should be less incarceration, and that we need to get people out of prisons,
Right.
has become an issue that both Republicans and Democrats speak on. That
Right.
it's become basically universally a thing that people agree on, that people need to be taken out of prison, or like there need to be less people in prison in our country.
Sure.
And what I thought was interesting was some man said, should we need to really ask ourselves, should we feel comfortable that the people leading this conversation are leading it only when we're in a moment where it feels politically okay to do so, like acceptable to do so? And I think it's interesting that we've gone through so many of these moments of like watershed social movement, like they were also saying in the movie, Martin Luther King was completely criminalized in his time, and now white women and men in the suburbs of wherever put him up on a pedestal, and they're like, oh yes, we should care about people's character, because
he was criminalized because he was radical.
Right.
In a time that was,
right.
It was not acceptable to think that, hey, blacks should have equal rights.
Yeah, and now it's easy for the conservative white woman to put him up on a pedestal.
But let me ask you, is she really putting him on a pedestal, though? Because is she thinking that it's actually, is just because it's politically okay she puts him on a pedestal, or does she actually think that he's a character that should be
well,
revered?
I think his message and certain quotes that he has said can be taken out of context and easily swallowed for someone who isn't racist, like that kind of like doesn't see color.
Sure, of course.
That's kind of more easily swallowed in today's day and age, without understanding that his message can't just stop there, that it's not like, now I don't see color and everything's right in the world. There is still systems of oppression taking place. The world is still a very unfair place.
Of course.
And those systems need to be reckoned with before we can go forward. And so I feel like I've been all over the place. But
no, keep going. This is good.
But where was I before Martin Luther King? I feel like I was using him.
The white woman as a pedestal, putting him up.
Yeah.
But if you don't mind.
Yeah. Go for it. I've lost my train of thought.
No, but I think that he's been put up on a pedestal because, black people have now gained certain tangible rights. Mm-hmm. The right to vote. There are certain tangible methods that we have gained our rights, that are quote unquote equal to blacks. Segregation is gone, but there are still people that are widespread, men and women alike, that think that black people are still second class.
Right.
That they still have that mentality, and it's. Do you think? I mean, but people, even those people who disagree with that blacks are equal to whites, even those who disagree with that, people, they will say, because it is politically correct, that Martin Luther King did good work, that what he said was correct, even though he was branded a criminal at the time. They still brand him as a criminal, but they only say that because they have to say it.
Right.
Do you think that those people, that, I mean, they're still there, but are they still put them on a pedestal because that's the case? Do you think that, like, I don't even know what I'm trying to ask here, but it's just why obviously, I mean, why do you think that's the case, I guess, is probably what I'm trying to ask.
I mean, I
have a couple ideas myself, but I want to see what you think first.
This reminds me of, did you and Hums watch the William Buckley debate with Baldwin?
Don't think so, no. All right, what these idiots say? Come on, you gotta dish it out now.
I need to
what these guys say.
Refresh my memory, but basically the question was, if I can remember correctly, I feel like I need to go look back at my notes, but
I'll look back if you have to. It doesn't matter to me.
I think what was the main question? It was something about whether or not black people in the country, I think after the civil rights movement or right before it, in that time period, have access to the American dream, or if that American dream is inaccessible because it's been built on their backs, basically. And I think, and Buckley was basically saying all people have access to the American dream,
right,
regardless of class. It's that black people, and I'm not sure if he specifically named Native Americans and Latin Americans, but he was basically saying those who have not gained economic success are just lazy, basically.
Right. And then Baldwin made an argument saying no, it is very inaccessible to few people, because they simply can't get it.
Right. And I think and a lot of people in my class were saying, oh, Buckley is just a racist in disguise. He's saying these things that everyone has access to the mechanisms of power, when really his secret plan is that only white people have access. And what I argued was that it's not that he was intentionally, secretly saying that really only white people should have access.
Right.
I think it's something much scarier than that. It's that he genuinely believes that we're all on this equal playing field. We live in a country where there is an equal playing field, and people do all have equal access, and the people that don't end up on the top are really just worse or lazier or criminals or not as good.
Right.
And that way of thinking is so much scarier to me, and I think that it's really widely held in the day we're living in now, where it can be easy for the conservative white person to take what Martin Luther King said out of context, which is that people should be judged based on their character and not the color of their skin.
Right.
And they can put that up on a pedestal and genuinely agree with it and say, look how great, I don't see color and nobody should, and everyone has access to economic success in this country.
Sure.
And that's the goal. That's what Martin Luther King said. Don't you see, guys?
I mean, it is a goal, but
right.
is it how? I mean,
right.
How attainable is it that when people say that, but they don't quite necessarily see what's stopping them from
right.
attaining that? Because as of right now, I feel like some people have said, okay, we have achieved that goal, but in reality, there are still multitudes of people who live under a fist,
right?
Because they don't. They're in a situation where they have parents or children who are in a situation where their only way out is through music, which is highly unlikely that they will make it, or through guns, violence, and drugs, which is easier. It's flashier, but it's also a lot harder to get caught. It's a lot harder to go to prison that way. Right? And that's the Section 8 household. They have to get off under the fist in order to actually attain the goal of we are truly now free.
Right. Yeah, and I think exactly that is what I see missing in the way that it can sometimes be acceptable to talk about race as this kind of like, I'm not racist, I don't see color business and putting that phrase out of context on a pedestal, is that you are missing reckoning with the reality of mass incarceration rates and economic inequality by race in this country, and saying that we are on an equal playing field and all is well. Because if you go forward as if all is well, when it's not, it won't become well.
Right. That's a situation right there.
Right.
Or this is a cheesy one. A situation.
Right.
Yeah. There we are. Joke
But
number
yeah.
1. Let's go.
Let's go.
But yeah, no, I think it's not good. But now I think we kind of got off from
right.
my first question a little bit. But,
I did notice that.
But now do you think that the blindness that I alluded to earlier, do you think that's disappeared a little bit, or would you, I mean, I have my ideas and I'll dish it out real quick, but I think it has to a certain extent, obviously not completely, but I think it has because of social media. People are now starting to see that people are now starting to see that police brutality is a real issue. They're starting to get all this footage of police shooting or putting down people of color who's saying, hey, I can't breathe, yo, let me up.
Right.
Let me breathe, yo. And then, but they still don't. They're like, fuck your breath, bro, stay down. And they try to lock them up, and they die in the attempt because they can't, it's excessive force. They have no ability to get away from that situation. And so I think to a certain extent it's started to fade a little bit, but not to the point where it's not a problem anymore. It's still a very prevalent problem, just not possibly as big as it used to be. I'm hesitant when I say that.
Right.
But what sayest you?
Yeah, so that reminds me, the reason I brought up the thing about being able to put that ideology of not seeing color up on a pedestal, is, and why I brought up these big social movements like the civil rights movement, like Black Lives Matter, like this kind of popularizing of being woke or whatever,
right,
on social media. I think the reason I brought that all up is because I think what is being swallowed by the public, by the general public, is still what feels safe.
right.
So like, we love the idea of wokeness that is like, I accept everyone. When men and women should be equal. Gay people should get married. There should be no race. Like that, we love to put that up on social media, and to say that all is great. But I think the reality is that the general public is not going to deal with the real problem
Entertain as to what the real problem that you see is.
Like,
what's up?
Like these large systems of oppression that have made certain communities of color so much more disadvantaged economically, socially, like in so many aspects, that's not going to go away just because social media is highlighting specific stories. I think it is a step in the right direction that this generation seems to be more than any other generation, or actually I shouldn't say that because I don't know about other generations, but I think a lot of times the youth are the people that are pushing for social change.
Right.
And I think it is, I think you're right, that it is a step in the right direction, that has become popularized and important in the media to speak about the Black Lives Matter movement, to speak about social justice and wokeness and all of those things. But I also think that
it hasn't really actually changed.
It hasn't solved the root of the problem, and it won't until if everyone doesn't continue to be super, super vigilant. And I liked what, I took a note, what was that woman's name in the movie said, that police violence isn't the problem itself, it's just a reflection of a much larger brutal system of racial and social control known as mass incarceration, which authorizes that kind of police violence. And that just speaking about
keep going, this is good, keep going.
That just speaking about online the police violence, while that is so important, and I 100% back that movement, and I think that movement has so much merit because the Black Lives Matter movement has so much merit because it is really highlighting something that's going on that isn't highlighted as easily and simply as the Parkland shooting.
Right.
Whereas all of a sudden that is everywhere. It takes so many more loud voices to get this movement coverage and a voice. And so, I don't even know where I'm going. Basically, yes, I agree with you that the way that social media has made social movements even more public is a 100% step in the right direction.
Right.
it is going to take more than some Twitter posts about an awful violent shooting to deal with the root problem that we see.
Boom. That was it right there.
I don't know. I feel like I'm like all over the dang place.
No, that was good. Shit. Where are we going? Oh, damn.